Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of The Consistency Project. If you want to help your clients put the evidence-based information from this podcast into practice, my 3 Pillars Method Coaches Masterclass is for you. It gives you a system that you can use while still individualizing for each client. So they get their own unique plan to lean out, fuel their fitness performance, improve their health, or just stay consistent in the long term. My Coaches Masterclass offers an immersion experience for you. You go through the process yourself to understand how it worked for a client, and then we also work on coaches' topics. Here's Coach Rachel.
I found going to different CrossFit gyms and they're so focused on macros and shredding, and I'm like, this is too neurotic for me. This is miserable. I hate it. Other people hated it and didn't get super good results. And I'm just like, can we just go to the basics? And where is a framework around that? And I think one of the major things that makes it different is that you're going through the program yourself. And then you're in a cohort with other coaches that are coaching other people in different levels and experience.
My Coaches Masterclass is all about actually getting client results, not just talking about physiology. Here's Coach Sam.
EC is completely based in research, but she thinks so much about the behavioral aspect of everything. She'll always give it to us through the lens of how are your clients going to need this information and how is it going to best serve them. She's very much interested in what is actually going to work with your clients.
If you're interested in joining my next Coaches Masterclass, go ahead and check out optimizemenutrition.com/masterclasscoaches. The link is also in the show notes. Let's get into the show.
Hello and welcome to the Consistency Project podcast. Every week here on the show, EC and I aim to simplify the principles and practices of nutrition, health, and fitness. Thank you for joining us this week. I'm Patrick. I am here with just a quick introduction. We are reaching back into the archives of the show to bubble up a conversation that we wanted to remind you about. We're doing so because EC is deep in the process of writing her first book right now. So while she toils away at that, we wanted to bring back a conversation about one of the few nutrition books that she actually recommends to you. She's working on a book that obviously she's going to recommend to you. There haven't been that many nutrition books that she feels like covers the right territory in the right way, that when people ask her, hey, what's a good nutrition book? She doesn't always have a great answer, but she does have some answers. And this conversation is about one of those books that she does recommend. It was a conversation that she had with author Adam Bornstein back in October of 2023. He wrote a book called You Can't Screw This Up. And they talked about why your self-perception, believing that you are a healthy person versus believing that you can be a healthy person, determines whether a nutrition plan actually sticks. They talk about Adam's 3 pillars of healthy eating, and then they talk about how to tell if you're moving boulders, quote unquote boulders, which are habits that actually matter, instead of pebbles, which are fear-driven, marketing-fueled distraction. I'm really excited to bring this back to the surface. Again, Adam's book is called You Can't Screw This Up. Without any further ado, enjoy.
I was just mentioning before we get on, I get asked from my community all the time, what are some good books to read? What's the next good nutrition book? And my list is so short, and I'm so thankful to have another one. I really enjoyed reading your new book, You Can't Screw This Up. So yes, community, if you like what you typically hear on this podcast, you're definitely going to enjoy this book, and I'm thrilled to have you here. So
that means a lot to me. There are no shortage of books. There's definitely a shortage of good books, and I think that's it took me a while to write this one, and I think there was a lot of hesitancy because I didn't want to add to that noise, because there's a lot of noise.
Yeah, I found out about you via Alan Aragon, so he's another one on the list. And so I'm glad to add another one of yours to the list. But one of the things that I really enjoyed about the book was kind of throughout the book, you remind people that they can't screw it up, which is so great in nutrition. But it turns out that there is actually one way that you can screw up your diet plan. And so do you mind letting people know what that is and why that one thing is just so detrimental to their progress?
Yeah, I think most people think the ways they screw up are all the quote unquote obvious ones that people are told, right? Most people, when they sit and hear this or they see the title, I've heard many people go like, oh, trust me, you don't know me. I can screw this up. And that's because they think the screw up is the eating of the dessert, the not getting their workouts in, the eating of the carbs, the not counting the calories, right? There are so many different things that we have operationalized as the straight and narrow only path of what it takes to be healthy. And to me, there are two things that people need to understand in terms of going into like what the real screw up is one, there are so many things that work to help people become healthier. And knowing that, not as an opinion, as a fact, I have the ways that I prefer to eat, but knowing that there are so many different things that you can eat, so many different ways that you can exercise, so many different ways that you can live. If that is true, how could it also possibly be true that the variation, the differences, the quote unquote mistakes are actually that detrimental, right? If someone can go on a low carb plan and someone can go on a high carb plan, how can we possibly tell someone that carbs are the mistake or dessert or whatever it might be? And the second one is that the real screw up, the real problem, and if you zoom out, is this catastrophizing, this pressure, this stress that we put ourselves in to follow these perfect plans. Because what happens is when we think we need to be perfect, we're literally just flipping the hourglass, setting a timer on this explosive that is going to blow up in our face. That moment when we do the thing we can't do on the plan, either because our willpower is not there, we're tired, we're exhausted, or we really just want to order some takeout. And then we catastrophize and we think that we screwed up. And one of two things happen when we think we screw up. First of all, we just throw in the towel. We say, I screwed up my week, right? So all goes out the window. I'm done. I screwed up, which doesn't make any sense, but that's what happens, right? We've all been there. I've 100% been in that position where it's like, I can't believe I did this. Or, right, it's the opposite. We go to the other extreme. Not that everything is wrong. I did this. I ate this meal. It's terrible. I need to starve myself the next day. I need to work out twice as hard. I need to restrict even harder. And the funny thing about that is the more that you go in that other extreme, the more likely that you end up getting back to the exact same place where you just say, screw it, I can't do this. And the real screw up is following these incredibly rigid plans that break us psychologically. And that is why we fail physically. The screw ups are buying into extreme plans based on an extreme belief that the only way to be healthier is to live in a way that forces you to follow strict parameters with no variance, no leeway, and asks you to fundamentally not be a human, as opposed to realizing there is plenty of room for variation. There's plenty of room for variety. There's plenty of room for you to eat the foods that you enjoy while combining that with many healthy habits and getting still incredible results.
Totally. Yeah. Letting people just be humans. And I think just setting that stage for people is so helpful. So, you've worked with many people that are caught in that diet cycle of trying to be perfect, doing the all or none. And, I think so many of the diet plans sort of start off with, okay, we'll clean out the cabinets of the grains or get rid of all the sugar or detox or whatever the heck it is, right? But you actually suggest that kind of people start with something else first, that it's not necessarily even food related. And so can you let people know like what's kind of that first shift people really have to do and some practical ways to really go about that?
Yeah, I mean, the fun thing here is there's so many, but the one that I love starting with, it's more of a mindset shift. It's really a self-perception. And, our attitudes, our self-beliefs directly influence our behaviors. And that's such an important thing to learn because it runs counterintuitive, right? So many of us think that, okay, if I can just get the motivation to go ahead and be healthier, to eat this food, then I'll go ahead and I'll get on this diet plan. And then once I have that diet plan and I start losing that weight, I'm going to feel better about myself. And when I feel better about myself, like that, that is the reward. Whereas behavioral change, the study of behavioral change suggests it's the opposite. The study of behavioral change suggests that you're not ending with improving your self-perception. You're starting with it. And that's because this idea of cognitive dissonance, whereas like if your mindset is at odds with the behavior, right? If you don't believe you can be healthy, if you don't believe that you can succeed, if you don't believe you can stick to this plan, that is going to create so much friction when you start the plan, even though you have high hopes, even though you want this to be successful, if you don't believe that you yourself can be healthy, that friction will result in a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, and a higher likelihood, not a guarantee, but a higher likelihood that you won't be able to stick to that plan and not be able to succeed. And what I then suggest for people is that you have to get to that moment where you change your self-perception. And there is a big difference between believing you are a healthy person and believing you can be a healthy person and actually having achieved that goal. And the example I give in the book is that any of us have, at any point of our life, have been in a position or a job where we knew we could be good at this job, or at least hopefully, but we weren't yet good at it. And it's usually the beginning part of any job, right? Like you get better as you go on. Or when you're in school, first day of school, when you don't know how to do addition or subtraction or whatever class you're in, but you have the capability to learn. You don't sit there being, I'm dumb. You're like, no, I can learn this. I just need the opportunity to learn. Nutrition and wellness is the same thing. Believing you are capable of being healthy is not dependent on already being there. Think about that. It makes no sense whatsoever. Why should you have to have achieved your goal in order before you even think you are capable of achieving it? So shifting your self-perception is kind of walking through the idea of, I am a healthy person, but I have not yet found what works for me. I care deeply about my health, but I am stressed that so many plans have not been successful, as opposed to I am a failure. I am not successful. And guys, it sounds a little funny, but this is psychology 101. This is how we build these self-affirming beliefs of not creating a negative narrative, right? Because like everyone talks about, right? Like the path to success is paved in failure. And yet in wellness and nutrition, when we fail, or really I'd like to reposition, when we struggle to figure out what works for us, sometimes because we've been given a terrible set of tools, we internalize it and we blame ourselves and we carry that. And then it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where you're just waiting to fail. The title of this book, You Can't Screw This Up, was not the original title of this book. I put a test group of 500 people through this. I've been doing this long enough. I've been in this industry for 20 years. I've written a lot of books. And the one thing I learned about books from a mistake early on was like, make sure one, people read the book before you give it to everyone else so they can point out the areas that don't make sense, that are confusing, maybe not helpful. And two, put people through the program so you make sure it works. I'm putting people through the program and we're about a month in and people, like most diet programs, right? The month test is a bad litmus test and we can talk about that because anyone can see results in 4 weeks. It's like zoom out 4 months and tell me where you're at. But you're in that 4-week period and everyone's like doing really well. But all the feedback I'm getting from people is, I'm going to screw this up. I'm going to screw this up. And I'm like, did something happen? Like, no, I feel great, but like, I'm going to screw this up. Right. And it's this mentality and they're like, why? And it's not just the fear of what we talk about, right? Of like creating these extremes and this perfection. It's that their past ends up predetermining their future. They have made a mistake at some point that they have perceived as a mistake. So in their mind, they're essentially just like carrying this burden that they're not healthy, that they're not good enough. And you have to reframe that like, if you truly did not care about your health, you wouldn't buy any of these books. You wouldn't waste your hard-earned money on even supplements or detoxes that are BS, right? They don't work, but it doesn't mean that you don't care. You do care. You wouldn't be listening to this podcast. Like, we know the things that we deeply care about. And the things that we deeply care about are a reflection of who we are as a person. So if you can recognize that your intent and your energy and your heart are in the right place, but the execution has been off, and you can believe that you are a healthy person, you can start with a mindset that is more likely to not fail you when it gets hard, because it will get hard at some point. And when it gets hard, that's the most human part. That is expected. That is not a flaw. That is not a failure. That is not a problem. That is a part of the human condition. And if you can realize that as part of the process, when you get there, you don't have to freak out. You don't have to feel like you screwed up. And it allows you to better navigate those difficult moments rather than going to one of those two paths that we talked about before, where you're either like going to an extreme or you're catastrophizing and just completely quitting.
Yeah. Starting with that identity shift is huge. And one of the things I loved was that I think sometimes that can almost be so nebulous for people. It's like, well, how do I do that? And I think you kind of also point out that even when they're starting out and maybe they want to be this healthy eater, that every time they make a healthy eating choice, you can reaffirm that identity, right? Like you don't have to wait till you are doing it 100% of the time or 90% of the time. We know that it's perfect, but you can, every time that you do a healthy step in the direction, right, that can help help people adopt that identity, right?
Yeah, I think most people don't know what success looks like because we taught that success looks like a certain number on the scale or a certain image in the mirror, and that can be a byproduct of the effort. But right, it is much more important to focus on process goals, right? Like what are the things that fundamentally get you? Taking it back to like a school example, I used to teach people and I'd have students that would come to the office hours and they'd be like, I want an A, I want an A. And I'm like, instead of stressing about the A is a byproduct of the effort. And the effort is like, well, what does it take to get an A? Are you reading the chapters? Are you studying? Are you coming to office hours? And the more you double down on the habits, behaviors, routines, and actions that are most likely associated with good outcomes, the more likely you are to get that outcome. And we focus on the scale, but the scale is not a behavior, right? The behavior is like, how am I reading a few pages of this book that's supposed to help me out? Am I talking to myself more positively? Have I gone from 0 days of walking per week to 1 or 2? Have I added a vegetable to a meal a day rather than worried about having it 5 times a day? Have I tried to focus on eating more protein or drinking more water or just having fewer sugar-filled beverages, right? Progress is rarely linear. I think the mistake that most diet books make, and I don't think they're all done intentionally, and I say that in earnestness, is the mistake is that people come from this moment where they finally figured out what works for them. And they ask you to start where they are now rather than they start where they began. And this is an iterative process. It is a journey. I would be doing you all a gigantic disservice if I told you or wrote in my book, here's what I do today. Me, in the wellness industry 23 years now, because I can tell you what happened 23 years ago looks nothing like what I did today, right? And it is akin to taking someone who has never gone swimming before and can, swim in the ocean. And just because you can swim in the ocean, I shouldn't be dropping you in the deep end. I should have you put your toe in the shallow end and realize that the water isn't scary. And with nutrition and wellness, we need to start people in the shallow end, get them comfortable, and then they can choose the level of comfort of like what habits serve them and what habits don't serve them. But to take the person who never eats any sugar and never has any carbs and works out 6 days per week, I'm not saying that those are necessarily bad habits. I'm just saying that they're, one, not necessary to be healthy, and two, they are definitely not the place to start because that requires so much discipline, so much habit, so much personal experimentation to figure out what you can sustainably do, that starting at that end position is what all these books do, as opposed to showing people, how can I build the habits and behaviors that make me feel better, that make me more confident, that cause me to not lose my mind. And then from there, I can decide, oh, wait, I feel good. I'm good in this position, right? Or, no, I want to challenge myself more, or I want to lose weight, or I want to become stronger, or I want to eat more vegetables, right? Like that's a position of power. When like you've actually been able to master some basic behaviors that make you fundamentally feel better about yourself and see changes as opposed to just skipping to the end. And if we can focus on those processes, oh my goodness, does it take so much of the edge off, so much of the stress away, and you start seeing a lot better results from your efforts.
Totally. Yeah. So my audience has heard a lot about the 3 pillars method. That's actually how I go about teaching people nutrition and putting some of the principles into practice. And so when I was reading your book and I came across the 3 pillars of healthy eating, I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I'd love for you to describe what your 3 pillars of healthy eating are for my audience.
Yeah, so there's technically 2 answers of ways that I can look at this, right? It's like the for me, like the 3 pillars are like, what's the pillar of like what stands in your way, and what's the pillar of like how you should design a diet, right? So like when I look at what stands in most people's way, and this is important to differentiate these two because I think people's barriers are a little bit different, right? Like when you've got your cost, you have your complexity, and you have convenience, right? So a lot of times I'm like, why can't I figure this out? Like A, it might be too costly for you. B, it might be too complex, right? You know you should do it, but I'm like, I just don't get it. And people don't want to admit that they don't get it. Or 3, it's inconvenient, right? Like you're sitting there and you're like, I would love to do this, but my lifestyle does not align with this plan. And there is no shame in that, right? So like 3 pillars of like the barriers of why adoption of a plan is so important, because like you might not find that my plan is for you, and that's okay. I wrote this book to help people have clarity that no matter what style of eating they choose, I'm kind of dietary agnostic. They not don't feel so stressed or confused about what's in the way. And then when I look at the pillars of like eating itself, I actually like to look at it almost from like a qualitative to a quantitative, because I know the foods that I'd want to eat. But I think people can then get hung up in foods, right? So then I look at things like I want people to be nourished or satisfied. Now, what that means for a lot of people could be different, but in general, it means you want to have more protein in your diet and you want to have more fiber in your diet. However, you want to get that protein or fiber, I'm not here to judge you. Do what works for you. All of it can work really well, but you need to stay nourished and satisfied, because satisfaction is a big part of dealing with hunger. Because when we lose weight, or when we change our diet and we're not even necessarily focused on losing weight, but we're just going to be eating in a different way, our body's going to get hungrier. And the key to controlling hunger is on the brain level, which means you got to eat the type of foods that send a signal to your brain saying, slow down, I'm full. Right. So like the idea is you've got to stay nourished, you got to stay full. Protein and fiber are going to be your best friends, staying hydrated as well. Then you need to go ahead and the second pillar is going to be, you got to remain sane, right? Like people lose their mind. So a lot of times when people, like after we get past the self-perception, we talked about, you mentioned like a lot of people will like clean out the pantry. When I start with a client, if I'd work on someone one-on-one, I'm asking them, what's the food you need in your diet? What's the food that you love? And they're like embarrassed. They're like, it's cheesecake. And I'm like, good, thank you. We're not getting rid of cheesecake. And they'll be like, oh, what? No, no. It's like, no, because we are creatures that like, if you restrict something completely, we want it 10 times more. And I'm not saying you're eating cheesecake every single day, but so many of these diets go to restrictive mode that again, we are just asking to fail, right? So you got to remain sane. And let's say it's not even dessert, right? If you are someone who loves pasta, I'm not going to put you on a super low carb or keto based diet plan. You know why? Because you love pasta and you shouldn't have to change that about yourself, because there's nothing that tells us carbs are inherently fattening. Carbs are just another tool that you can manipulate to help with weight management, weight loss, or eating better. But there's no reason. I got plenty of people who they love pasta. I'm like, cool, we're going to be eating pasta on this plan, right? Because you have to stay sane, because the key thing to winning at healthy eating is consistency. And the more consistent you can make the behavior, the easier it is for you to progress. But if you start from a position of like, I hate this, I can't wait till I'm done with this. And that's right. Some people like count the days till a cheat day or count the days till they're done with the plan. I mean, come on, that's like getting hired for a job and knowing you hate it on day one. And you're going to be like, well, I can't wait till I leave this place. What are you doing there? And this is your life, right? This isn't like a job. You have a lot more volition and control over how you eat than you think. So you got to go ahead and remain sane. And like the third one is you got to avoid the guilt and the shame, right? We talked about this before, that these are the things that corrode your mindset. It is cliche to say, but where the mind goes, the body follows. And if you were walking around, I quoted one study in there that like the average person stresses or feels anxious about each meal 7 times. So if you're eating 3 times per day, that's 21 additional stressors on you. And most people eat more than 3 times per day. I'm like, life is stressful enough, right? Because people are thinking about what they're going to eat and they got the guilt afterwards. And did I eat healthy enough? And did I have too many calories? And like, was this nutrition enough? There's so much stress. Like you have to avoid this guilt that even if you don't eat the right thing, you don't start letting the ball roll down the hill where you feel bad or you act like this one meal is the end all be all, because it's not. Our bodies are so resilient and so strong. And when we get in a bad place, it's because we've repeatedly done something over and over for months, or in most cases, years. It was never a single meal. No different than if you were to flip it and you ate one good meal per week. No one's sitting there being like, I am the healthiest person in the world, right? We don't think that. You're like, this is so hard. How do I replicate this another 20 times? The same works, right? If you have a meal that is off every now and then, it's okay, because in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big deal. So you got to avoid that. So it's just, again, it's the satisfaction is a pillar. It is keeping your sanity and eating things that you enjoy. And it's avoiding that guilt when you have those human moments that might push you towards and that you're taught is bad. In reality, it's really not a big deal.
It's got us to keep that big picture, which actually reminds me of the discussion in your book about kind of boulders and pebbles and how you really want to focus on moving boulders. And that I think a lot of the diets, maybe in the mainstream, have people focused on pebbles, removing this exact food or I don't know, whatever other fear mongering they might use. And so I love it conceptually, but I guess how does somebody know if they're moving a boulder? And when we talk about we don't want people to have to feel like they're jumping into a deep end, they might need to take a small step towards a boulder. So how do they know when they're moving a boulder and versus maybe just moving a pebble? Or how do they know that they're just making a small change towards a boulder and not on a pebble?
Yeah, it's such a good point because it's tough, right? I think navigating the nutrition space in the wellness industry is one of the hardest things to do. So there are a couple of different ways to look at this, right? Sometimes the pebble behaviors are driven just completely by fear. So right when you're trying to sift through, and I'm not saying that like anything that creates fear is wrong or problematic, but when you're trying to make sense of like, hey, what should I listen to? If messaging is rooted in making you fearful of something or suggesting you need to buy something that is proprietary to an individual, it's usually a good red flag. Another way to identify a boulder versus a pebble is to focus on what different diets or philosophies have in common rather than what they have different, right? Because so many diets that seem diametrically opposed, that seem dramatically different, actually have some similarities, and that can guide you towards like, oh, this must be good if these people who seemingly hate each other, right, agree on this thing. Like most people, a lot of people disagree on like whether you can have any sugar in your diet, right? So you're like, I don't know about sugar, but no one's really going to be disagreeing about whether you should add more whole foods to your diet in general. No one's really disagreeing of whether you should eat more protein in general. How much is up to you and dependent on goal. No one's going to be disagreeing really about fiber, right? Some people might even be disagreeing about vegetables. Some people think vegetables are bad, which I think is one of the craziest things I've ever heard in my life. But like no one's going to argue about like the need for certain micronutrients. So you ask like what are micronutrient dense foods? No one's going to be railing against water or walking. So you can kind of identify higher level behaviors that the majority of people agree that if you strip away the marketing, if you strip away the specific food or the mechanism that creates all the fear, right? You can start identifying that like, oh, in general, I should probably eat fewer ultra processed foods, right? The things that have added salt, sugar, and fat. Do I need to completely remove them? That's up to you. That is a behavioral choice of what you think you can realistically do, but you should probably cut back on them. You should probably find a way to get more protein in your diet or get more fiber in your diet. You should probably find a way to sleep more often. Do you need to take a particular supplement to sleep or eat more protein? No, because there's not consensus. Do you need to be stressed about inflammation and balancing your hormones? No, because you don't see consensus. If you choose to go down that rabbit hole, that is fine. But I think the hard part in wellness is that the things that our brains are wired to react to are the things that are going to be crazier and more attention grabbing. And the things that are most likely to work are the things that are boring and you're most likely to scroll past on social media. And I think knowing that and having that awareness is incredibly powerful. I don't know when this will come out, but there's a new book that is coming out very soon, not my own, by an author who I love, Michael Easter. He wrote the book The Comfort Crisis. He has a new book coming out, Scarcity Brain. And I got to read Michael's book and just like looking at it, he asked for like editorial help. And he talked about like how there's these scarcity loops that, everyone knows that moderation is good, moderation, but it's like, how come everyone struggles with moderation? And one of the reasons is that like we actually are not aware of when people are pushing us towards behaviors that are fundamentally opposite of moderation. And in diet and wellness, We're not aware when we are been given an antidote that is actually the poison itself. And that is what makes wellness so incredibly difficult. And that is why I tell people to try and just ask more questions before we jump in. And the awareness here is knowing that when we hear about the intermittent fasting, and I'm not saying intermittent fasting is good or bad, or we hear about the inflammation or and toxins, right? Our brains, we lean in. We lean in, and when there's not consensus on something, it does cause you to question something, because science is based on two very, very boring principles, guys. It's reliability and validity. And this just means that you need to test something over and over and over again to ensure that the finding that you had can be replicable, and that what you thought was the outcome is actually the outcome. There are plenty of studies that seem very, very exciting, and no one can ever replicate them ever again. And it's very, very understandable that you want to jump on the next big thing, but the next biggest thing that has not been replicated is usually a massive detour that pulls you so far away from where you want to be. If your goal is to feel better or look better or sleep better or have more energy or lose weight or be more muscular or be stronger or be happier, I promise you, the key is not waiting at the end of a brand new study that hasn't been validated by anyone else, because there have been lean, happy, well-rested people for a long period of time. It's trying to find the habits and behaviors that have led there. And then as science get proven out, we might be able to take that up the next level. But this gets back to the boulders versus pebbles. The foundations of what it takes to be healthy are already established. They're not waiting in some new experiment. But the things that can make us even better after we have mastered those skills, once we have our sleep down, once we feel in control of what we're eating, once we're no longer stressed about this, right? There's something to be said about when you do things that are good for you, even if they are hard, and some of them are very, very hard. Do not conflate difficulty with beneficial. Some things that are hard make you feel a lot better. The things that you are doing makes you feel fundamentally worse. You should stop and ask yourself, is this really good for me?
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, I like that. The kind of the fear, for sure, is a great red flag. And yeah, the proprietary information, seek out the boring. My audience has heard that before. So let's say somebody is willing to give up the kind of the fear and the shiny objects and all of this stuff in social media land, and they're ready to take on the boring. Can you give them just a preview of what real sustainable progress will look like on the boring path?
From like a result standpoint, or like
they want to lose, I don't know, let's just say 50 pounds, 20 to 50 pounds. How's that process going to go?
If you're losing that much, you can expect on average 1 to 2 pounds per week. And if you're going to do more than that, that's great. But I like to zoom out and actually give yourself monthly goals, because there's going to be weeks where, there are fluctuations, whether you're not sleeping whether you're not drinking enough fluid, whatever is going on in life can cause like those fluctuations, where I tell people, if you have a week where the scale isn't necessarily moving the way that you want, again, you can't screw this up. Don't freak out. It's great to look at the trend month over month, right? Because sometimes weight isn't linear. You might lose 0 pounds one week and 4 pounds the next, and then you're right there at that 2 pound per week average. The less weight you have to lose, the more weight loss will slow down. The more weight you have to lose, you do have the likelihood of losing more than that 1 to 2 pounds on average per week. But why set yourself up psychologically to be upset when, if again, you focus on the processes themselves, when you're doing the right thing? I've seen it for 20 plus years. The results get there, right? And it's so important to zoom out again, because of this idea that, saying 1 to 2 pounds per week isn't really exciting. But if you're losing 8 to 10 pounds per month, it's pretty great. If you're losing 20 to 30 pounds over 3 to 4 months and doing so in a way that you actually keep it off, which is the hardest part, that's what you want. And you can go the fast route or the slow route. Both of them work for weight loss. But in terms of keeping it off, the slower routes that allow you to build habits so that, like, you again just don't fall off the wagon and ditch everything you did to get there, is so important. Because again, I don't think, and research backs this up, it's not difficult to figure out how to lose weight. Most people do on a diet plan. The problem is, what do I do to keep it off? And what do I do to keep it off without losing my mind or being a slave to this lifestyle that I do not choose? So the slow and steady route is about like, I'm trying to not only lose that weight, but I'm trying to find the things that I can do for a long period of time. This is like relationship building, right? Like, what works for me isn't necessarily going to work for you, but what works for me is about like, I have built in where the me eating foods that I like, or me eating foods that people might frown upon if they were like, oh my God, you like Frosted Flakes? And I'm like, yeah, I do. I like Frosted Flakes, and I'm not paid by anyone to say. I wish Kellogg's paid me. I wish Tony the Tiger would be like, Adam, would you like to be our spokesperson? And I'm like, oh my goodness, 8-year-old me is so excited right now. No, like that's the thing that I enjoy, and I find a way to do so and do so responsibly. But I just because like I just enjoy eating it. And if I get to a point where eating isn't enjoyable and it's stressful, it's miserable, I'm probably going to end up eating in a way that doesn't serve me or my goals, and then I get myself in a worse position. So I think for the majority of people, that slow and steady approach, it's not just about the speed, it's about like not getting back to that place where you lost the weight, you gained it back, and then you blame yourself. And I mean this. Like in some situations it might be your fault or you didn't follow through on execution. But a lot of times, right, you're just like you're given a roadmap that is designed to get you back to this exact place. And I hate to sound so cynical because there's so many wonderful people in the wellness industry. And go on record. There's so many wonderful, incredible people who dedicate their lives to helping others. But there are a lot of people in this industry that care about one thing, and that is making money. And it is very, very easy to prey upon people in the wellness industry because it's hard to be healthier. It's very easy to tell someone that they've been lied to or been deceived and that you have a better option, and then give them that option that works for a short period of time and then doesn't. And then what happens? You saw the short-term success. So you convinced yourself, well, I know it worked. So if I could just like juice detox every single week, if I could just never eat a carb again, if I could just avoid all dairy or gluten or fat or sugar or carbs or whatever it is, then I'll see those results. And all that is manipulation. Why don't you look at what happens when you can't stick on that plan, when you go off of it, what it does to you and how easily it makes you spiral? That's the problem. But what happens? You fail again and you're more desperate and you're more likely to buy in. You're more likely to spend more money, or you finally look a little bit better and you see the reflection you want in the mirror, but you feel like shit. And I've dealt with it for 20 years. It crushes me where like people get to that point that they've waited their whole life to get to, or what they thought they wanted. And they feel terrible because the juice wasn't worth the squeeze, and it doesn't have to be that way, right? That is not the only way to be healthier, right? When you get to that position, the obsession and the anxiety and the pain and the guilt that should go away, it shouldn't be amplified. But a lot of people end up living in a prison of their own making because they think that this is the only way to be healthy. And I hate that. I will fight against that as long as there is breath in my lungs, because it is a very problematic relationship that the wellness industry has. It's a manipulative relationship because it's so easy to break people and then make them more vulnerable because people want to be healthier, right? Because I know people want to be healthier. I know they want to figure this out. And I know it's really difficult. And it's really difficult when you don't know up or down or who to trust or what to do or what to spend money on. And I just, I empathize with those people. And there is sometimes just like taking a little bit of inventory of like, how do I feel? Is this actually improving my life? And is this the way that I want my life to look like? Because when you start adding these good, healthy behaviors, it does. You feel better. You feel more in control. You feel liberated. It serves you. You don't serve it.
Yeah. We talk a lot about the worried well here and just the harmfulness of kind of all the neuroses and the obsession and all of that stuff. So yeah.
We will be back to the interview in less than a minute, but first, I just wanted to make sure you know about the 3 Pillars Coaches Program. If you are a coach, please listen up. Head to optimizemenutrition.com, tap on the affiliation tab at the top of the screen to learn more about how you can become a 3 pillars method coach and help your clients finally ditch the nutrition gimmicks and hacks that so often lead to nothing but frustration. You know what I'm talking about. 3 Pillars coaches can license the methods and materials EC uses to teach others nutrition. That's the 800-gram challenge, lazy macros, and the 3 Pillars method. You'll also get ready-made nutrition materials to help you build a nutrition coaching practice that works, that is effective, and that is profitable. If you want to learn more, head to optimizemenutrition.com. Just tap on the link in the show notes. Okay, back to the conversation.
Next thing of like not being so perfectionism and all the restriction that maybe you get to this end state, but then you're still not happy there. So one of the mantras that you kind of say in the book, and I think it's from your former client, Cindy Crawford, something like 80% of the time you're 80% good or something like that. And I love the mantra because it's not focusing on perfection. But we also know that people typically have something already in their life they have to change, right? Whatever they're doing right now is not actually moderate. And so how does somebody know if they're kind of doing this 80% good 80% of the time? Like, are there certain ways they can start to judge that better, that they're actually kind of in that ballpark?
Yeah, I think there are a couple ways that you can look at this. And I think, it was one of those things that I had to include it in the book because this was one of the first times I met Cindy in person. I met her at her house and she was cooking up pie. And you kind of have this moment where like, is this like an act? Like Cindy Crawford. And like she shared that mentality of 80% good, 80% of the time. And so much of that is allows her to stay consistent over time because she's not just constantly craving these things. And I think part of the way if you're actually being 80% good 80% of the time is like, how often are you craving something? Because if you're craving it all the time, right, you've probably restricted yourself so much. If you're never craving anything as a human, or I might be wondering like, how often are you doing this thing? So, weeks are easy because like we've got 7 days in a week and like we don't have to be particularly good at math to understand like, how often should I be having these meals? That's why I don't like the idea that, people get hung up on like the term cheat meal or whatever it is. And, I think that sometimes people just use language because it's what's commonly accepted. I don't think people should think of things as food as cheating, but if you want to label that, I won't blame you. But the idea of like you only get one shot to eat something is a little bit extreme, right? So you could look at, hey, if I'm eating 3 main meals a day, I'll put snacks aside and there's 7 days in a week, right? There's 21 meals in a week. Like 80% is roughly going to be like 4 of those meals can like have more room. And it doesn't mean that you disrespect yourself. I think the problem with cheat meals is that like this is my one chance to eat this. So I got to eat it all to the point of pain because I'm never going to touch this stuff again. And that's the wrong mentality. And like to me, so it's more about like, there are a few meals per week where when you're starting out, if you're really struggling to build a behavior, make it very easy for yourself. Give yourself an arbitrary number that is roughly accurate to 80% of your week in 80% of the time, right? So like say it's 4 meals where there's just like, you don't have to be so intentional with the protein and the fiber. There's just a little more room where you then try and focus on the other meals of doing those better behaviors. And it's just like, how consistently can I do it? And then you start to determine, do I need a little more freedom more often, less often? Everyone's a little bit different because sometimes you find that if you can learn how to control or manage your hunger, because that's the hardest thing, right? Portion sizes are really, really difficult for people, which is why it's easier to look at it from a meal by meal basis than a portion size. But if you can learn how to do that and you can learn to not crave things, right? Like eating it a little bit makes you eat a lot. You start to realize that there's actually a lot of freedom. One of my favorite studies to look at is this study that was about like eating dessert for breakfast. I'm not sure if you're like familiar with this. It was like there was 2 different 16-week windows. So 16 weeks, people went on either a high protein, high carb diet with dessert, or they went on a high protein, low carb diet with no dessert. And dessert was literally like a cookie or a donut, but people were eating 16 to 1800 calories per day. They worked with a dietitian. They had someone keeping them accountable. And within those first 16 weeks, the lower carb, high protein group, no dessert, I believe, lost 33 pounds in 16 weeks. The dessert for breakfast group, higher protein still, but again, everyone's calorie control, lost 30 pounds. So both low carb, a little bit better, but like 30 and 33 pounds, pretty good success rate. Then the next 16 weeks, they let everyone go on their own. No more dietitian monitoring. It's eating ad lib, so they're eating as they want, but still having to check in with their weight week by week. And what you see is the people in the dessert for breakfast group go on to lose, I believe it was like another 15-ish pounds. And the people in the no dessert, low carb group gain back 20 pounds. So the delta ends up being like 35 pounds over this 32-week study. And the lesson here isn't like, you need to dessert for breakfast makes you lose weight. It's like, no, these people during those 16 weeks learned portions, learned that they could eat this stuff, and learned that they didn't have to feel guilty and they didn't crave anything else. So when they were left to their own devices, they were still able to eat the stuff that they liked. They were still able to enjoy, and they were actually able to stay on that plan for a longer period of time. Where when left to their own devices, the people who couldn't touch dessert, couldn't touch a carb, it was so much harder for them to sustain. They didn't know how to balance the stuff, and they gained back the majority of the weight. And I think this is a beautiful anecdote, a microcosm of what happens on so many plans, right? Take it so that you can master these things, so you can feel in control. So it's like very easy. And then you can determine how to wield these tools, the power, the knowledge of what it means to eat well in a way that benefits you. But you have to progress to that, right? Because if you would have started those people without the guidance of support of just eat dessert for breakfast, and they didn't even know serving sizes, I know what would have happened in that experiment, right? Like if left to their own devices, the people in the dessert group wouldn't have lost 30 pounds in those first 16 weeks. They would have gained a lot of weight and probably hated that they were on that experiment. And it wouldn't even been a process. So I do think that putting on training wheels with so many things, it's a go slow to go fast. Do the type of things that like just feel almost kind of redundant or pedantic or below you, but they're not, because all that's going to do is just make you super confident, super in control, that you can then decide that like, oh, I want to actually, like, when I eat 4 times per week, I actually desire it 7 times per week. That's not what it should do, right? When you put these things in place, it should do a good enough job that like the desire actually goes down. And you might decide some weeks you don't need anything at all, right? And like that's a beautiful position to be in, knowing that you have the room, the freedom to eat certain things, but you don't, not because you're afraid of it, just because like you no longer need it, or you no longer wanted it, or you didn't crave it. But start at a place where then you can adjust one way or another, as opposed to like, oh, Adam said I can't screw this up. Brownies, breakfast, lunch, dinner. And I'm like, nah, like, because that's screwing up, because you're going to the other extreme, right? The idea here is to avoid extremes, because the extremes are what break you mentally. The extremes are what throw you off one extreme or another. That's where the problems exist. And then you find what serves you. And there are so many different diets. Like you might find that you hate carbohydrates. I don't. I love bread and pasta far too much to remove it from my life. But I know people who really don't like carbs. And like a low carb or keto style diet or a paleo style diet, chef's kiss. That's great. I got nothing against it. I've got against the reductionist, fear-based mechanism. Like you're a horrible part, right? The judgments. Oh my goodness, the judgments that people get for like eating certain things as if like they stole your child. That's the issue. Like people should be driven towards healthier behaviors, not based on fear, but based on an understanding of how this will benefit or how it will not benefit you, and not just cherry picking something that serves their narrative. I've got no desire to do that, because then you don't help people, because you don't help them figure out what works for them. You force them into a decision by making them believe this is the only way. And it doesn't have to be that way. Like treat people with respect and give them the tools, and like, people are smart, but where they end up looking stupid is where they're only given one side of the story, and then like we blame them for believing things when like, how could they not believe that? Like if like I lived in a information tunnel where all I would hear is that like if I ate something it would kill me in 5 years, at some point I'd be like, well, I don't want to die. I don't. Right. So it's just like the messaging is so important, and it's why I love podcasts like these that just try and bring a little more sanity, a little more balance, and help people just navigate. You know, but something it's tough. I really do think it's tough, but there is a way out of all this craziness.
Yeah. Yeah, well, your book definitely adds to that. I'm sure my audience will want to read it because you're talking a lot about sustainability and consistency, which is some big themes around here. And also, your book goes into a lot more of the practical how-to, including some exercise stuff, including how to even navigate fast food ordering. So definitely, people should check out this book. And we'll put all the links in the podcast show notes, including to your daily newsletter with Arnold Schwarzenegger too. So if you'll get some fitness tips on there. And yeah, thank you so much for being on here and having this resource for people to actually find a sustainable nutrition plan.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I know that I did. Thank you so much to Adam for his time. Thank you to you for your time and your attention. One last reminder, if you are not yet subscribed to the Consistency Project podcast, wherever you're listening or watching this, please do. That will make EC and I very, very happy. And we thank you in advance. We also thank you for your ratings, your reviews, the questions you send, the notes that you send. Thank you so much. EC and I will be back next week for another episode of the Consistency Project.